Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you might be joining us, whether you're a morning bird or a night owl. Excuse me. I'm just happy that you're here with us. I'm sorry I had to cough up something right there. Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Richard Watkins podcast, where we explore big questions at the intersection of science and society. The Richard Watkins podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN. SPAN doesn't just talk about science, it puts science to work. SPAN bridges science, policy, and community to confront urgent problems and provide meaningful change through policy development, strategic planning, and innovation that improves lives. SPAN turns knowledge into action. Find out more at span-inc.org. That's SPAN-inc.org. We have an amazing show. We have an amazing guest, none other than SPAN COO MK Gamble is with us today. MK Gamble, how are you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Listen, I've been so excited to talk to you on the show. We finally got you here in the building or virtually in the building to talk to you and learn a little bit more so the folks can see just how incredible you are. And I'm just so privileged to be able to work with you. So spend a little bit of time. Let's back all the way up. Where is MK Gamble from? How did MK Gamble become MK Gamble? School, all that stuff. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am MK Gamble. I am an attorney by trade right now. Um, and where am I from? I am a very proud fifth generation Clevelander. Go Browns, go Cavs, go Guardians. But I spent the last few years actually in Chicago, Illinois. And educational background is I graduated from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, majoring in business. I triple majored in business law, marketing, and international business. And from there, I actually had a role my senior year of college that allowed me to go to grad school and learn about advocacy, as well advocacy in the healthcare industry. I always thought I'd work at the intersection of law and healthcare policy. It's kind of what the goal was. Starting out, knew I'd be an attorney. And so I took a detour before going to law school, where I got my master's from Case Western Reserve University back in Cleveland, Ohio, where both my parents went to medical school. Um, the School of Medicine offered a master's at the time that was basically policy, law, and medicine. It's called bioethics, clinical bioethics, very different than just non-clinical bioethics, in which I learned how to advocate for patient rights and to understand also what that intersection of law and medicine would be. Very, very interesting educational background. Gave me an opportunity to rotate through things like hospice care, Cleveland Clinic, Metro East, several surgeries. I got to do the left ventricle surgeries with Dr. Hawkins, who was one of two left ventricle surgeons in the US who could work on infants at the time. Um, After doing that clinical rotation and understanding every aspect of hospital administration, as well as all of the clinical from pastoral care to burn unit to med surge, I then pursued healthcare law at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. And that's what brought me to Chicago. And that is my educational background. Um, and so I've been a lawyer for 15 years now, 15 years practicing. Um, And I guess question about how I got towards a specific area or
Well,
um
one of the things that I was just really interested in, and I have the honor, pleasure, and privilege to just talk to some of the most amazing people, on the planet through this podcast, and you are not an exception to that rule. But we always like to talk about different things that folks may not be aware of, and I know one of the things that you have a strong background in. And I just think it's important for a lot of folks to just kind of understand this because it impacts so many aspects of our lives. Is this concept of government affairs, government relations, and lobbying? I guess before we get started, I wanted to see if we could kind of lay down some kind of working definition so the folks listening kind of know what we're talking about. When we hear the term government relations, government affairs, and lobbying. From your experience, what do those terms mean?
A very interesting question. Government affairs and lobbying. So lobbying is a subset of government affairs. Government affairs, and this is not going to be the Merriam-Webster definition. This is going to be kind of the MK's explanation of what we're looking at here. You think about public, so let's go broader. Public policy is kind of what you think of public affairs. You think about what that looks like for an image of a company, how you want to be represented, external affairs, things of that nature. Well, within that, you're going to have government affairs. And what government affairs is it deals directly with those interactions between private industry, often private industry, and government. And for purposes of this interview, I will talk about state government, and that will be the focus. And I'll speak specifically and generally about Illinois state government, but it's the focus on interaction and influencing within that area. So, kind of being a nexus between your industry or entity and state government, right? And having them understand exactly what impacts your industry, what the effects of legislation are, educating, research, following and tracking legislation, keeping up with anything that might impact your industry positively or negatively. And that's kind of what government affairs is. Now, lobbying, that specific subset within there is it is a role or and as a lobbyist, your individual duties revolve around not only tracking the legislation, but directly trying to build relationships with different government entities, stakeholders, maybe the executive branch, rule makers, decision makers, and we're talking about the state government level right now, maybe different agencies, and trying to advocate for your principal's position. And I've had that role in a number of different manners. I've also been an attorney for the House of Representatives in Illinois starting back in 2012 that led to me being with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and helping shape some of those criminal justice reform legislation from 2012 to 2017 and different legislation that came out from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I've been able to do that as well for Airbnb and some of the home sharing laws throughout Illinois, especially I'd say north of 355. We did a lot of legislation there before opening my own, hanging my shingle. And at my law firm, my lobbyist work that I do or my government affairs work. And in that capacity, I now work mostly in insurance industries, but I also have some nonprofits and others. So the goal is to have to represent the principal, whoever it may be, and go before government, whether it's testifying on legislation, it's writing actual, and it's very easy to actually write legislation and propose it through your elected official, taking it to your state house, having that legislation move through both chambers of the house, ensuring that you have the votes. You need to get through committee, you need to get the House floor, Senate floor, all of that, and switch chambers and have the legislation get back so that it doesn't wind up back in either your respective rules or assignments committee where it's dead until the next legislative session. So that's something that we do regularly. It's really built on. Well, let me say this: if I were to say that what are kind of traits that you need, it is effectiveness, great communication skills, right? And you need to reach your audience. You might have to meet people where they are, speak their language, also help them understand the terms and impact of your industry, especially if it's a heavily regulated industry or complex. Sorry,
I
that is
lost
not
your
well known.
audio there.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but not well known. Um, so that's something you want to do is work to understand who your stakeholders are. Maybe it's coalition building, that might be a part of it. Sometimes it's also grassroots initiatives, advocacy days, bringing people to the state capitol to ensure that they actually are heard and seen and meet with their respective legislative officials, or I'm sorry, elected officials and legislators, or to even have members heard, committee chairs, members, leaders within each chamber.
Yeah, so that's absolutely amazing. So, if I understand correctly, you stated that public affairs is how you are seen by the public in general. Government affairs is how you're seen by the government, well, federal or state. And what you were describing, you were talking about state. Then, when you're talking about lobbying, which is a subset of all of those, it's working with government, in this case state, to understand the industries that they will be regulating. And you can do that in a wide variety of ways. And I just think that's just such a critical aspect of just our society and just how our government works and how it impacts everyone, that I don't think a lot of people, understand or appreciate or value. um, I guess like when you talk to folks and when you work with folks, and the conversation of lobbying comes up, what are some common misconceptions that are brought to your attention that folks may have about lobbying, about lobbyists, and their role in governance and policymaking?
Controversial, very controversial topic, especially in these days. Misconceptions. I think sometimes people think that they're paying for, I mean, well, people assume that that lobbyists are paying for influence. The reality is that everybody has a representative before them. For instance, the first thing I ever did with government was actually in Indiana when I worked for people with different developmental disabilities and people who were independent living, group home, etc. I was able to put together a lobby day. I was covering for somebody else who became ill and took all of our constituents the 90 miles back to Indianapolis. And some are wheelchair bound, some are on walkers, some are, able to walk, and some have basically some have mobility issues, some have cognitive issues. It's a number of different and I actually do not like the word disabilities that we use in the US. I prefer the UK term, where it's differing abilities, but you have differing abilities, right? So being able to take those individuals and have them help them craft their signs, whether I wrote the signs or not. And we go up for a lobby day and have them meet their elected officials who were funding their ability to live independently at the time, right? Whether it's either through the group homes, they also had jobs at the time through Stone Belt, Otis Elevators before it relocated, I believe, down to Mexico or wherever else. People could come into what was like an adult day center, and based on their capabilities, I had individuals who worked in the day center and were able to put the buttons into the elevator panel. And I had other people who worked at the movie theaters or had regular jobs that you and I might have, based on their abilities. If you think of lobbying as simply the act of big business or big money pushing its influence through the legislature, then you are missing the whole concept of our democratic process. The First Amendment allows us, right, to um, speak through our vote, speak out independently about what we want obviously within certain confines of time, place, and manner, et cetera. But this allows people to be heard. In Illinois, at least, you can do it is not that hard. You go to your elected official and you ask for legislation. You bring an issue, it is seen and researched, looked into, and then from there it can become law. I remember I did first law I wrote as a young staffer was texting and driving. It's my understanding that a father, I think he was a father of four, I believe he was the sign holder, as I understand the story, on a major highway on the way down towards Springfield, was out there just holding the sign, I believe he was hit by young woman, young girl who was texting and driving, just not paying attention to construction zone. So something as simple as that, and the family coming out and saying, hey, we have to have laws in place. But how do you put that law into place? Right? Somebody had to advocate. People came to me to talk through, you meet with stakeholders. So we had I believe it was a family who initially pushed for it through the legislator, and we were looking at texting and driving. But what type of penalties? Is this administrative? Is this similar to regulating speeding? Is this going to have a criminal component to it? Is it simply going to be a fine? What does that look like? What is a deterrent? Now we've done something as complicated as some of the regulating of some of your what's it called, bio data, like fingerprints and retina scans and all of that in the legislature. So we've gone as far as that. But to misunderstand lobbying as simply the influence of big money or anything of that nature, I think is to misunderstand exactly the power of influence, where it is an opportunity for the everyday Joe to just come in and say, hey, I need something to help my community. What if you need more money for schools? Or if you want to lower the speed limit because maybe there's a curve in your community, right? And they're coming around just a little too fast. There are a number of ways in which you can shape and impact legislation. A lot of it is tracking of bills and regulations, meeting with the lawmakers and their staff, huge part, educating them on policies and how they impact communities, industries, organizations, including nonprofits, drafting talking points, position letters, and testimony. That is all a part of it.
Well, again, we're talking Span COO MK Gamble, thank you again for being with us today, but also thank you for your tremendous service. I mean, I just think it's just absolutely incredible, just the things that you've talked about already. And you were talking about tracking legislation, working with policymakers, and also working with community members. Can you walk us through? What, and I know it might differ from state to state, from lobbyist to lobbyist, but can you walk us through what a lobbyist may do in a given week? What is the life and times of a lobbyist? What could it look like?
Definitely differs. Depends on it's deadline week, non-deadline week, election year, non-election year. If you have a big bill up in committee that day. But just to give you some of the ideas of what happens. You will probably meet with elected officials. Well, you will, not probably. You will meet with elected officials during that time and their staff. You'll be able to give real world stories of constituents, present them data and research, practical solutions, and suggested language for laws, right? So um, you also meet with other stakeholders. The goal is to make sure an elected official is educated on an issue. So as they craft legislation and push this through, hopefully on your behalf, that it is a well-crafted law, and sometimes they have unintended consequences. You'll have cleanup legislation that you have to do later. Um, you want the legislator to be well informed. You also want to give underrepresented people a voice and a platform to be heard, help prevent, like I said, unintended harms from poorly written policies, and keep government accountable in certain areas. So that could include testifying before a hearing, drafting legislation. You might sit and, well, you're going to watch the House or Senate floor. You are going to meet with stakeholders that might be in opposition or maybe supportive of your initiatives. You want to do coalition building. There's strength in numbers. That makes sense. For instance, let's say there's certain legislation that's going to cut funding to rural communities in North Carolina, like say the eastern side of North Carolina, right? It's a lot of farm country in areas. If I were representing them, then my goal would be to reach a number either through an association and independent farmers, come together, understand what their issues are, and present them in a coherent manner that also reaches the legislative. And you have to distill those ideas down. A lot of times you communicate in one pagers. If you can't distill your idea into kind of the who, what, when, where, why, and who likes it, who hates it type summaries, you're not going to get very far.
This is just all so fascinating. Like, that just sounds like some of the most fulfilling work that, somebody can do, because you're touching on so many different elements of society, right? You're touching the aspect of the stakeholder, right? You're interacting with policymakers. I mean, the breadth and the depth of your experiences just are just simply and absolutely incredible. So how does a lobbyist, and I think I might know this answer already, but I've got to ask the expert on the call today. But how does a lobbyist know that they are successful? How do they measure success?
Legislation passed or killed. Um, a lot of times you're coordinating like a strategy call or advocacy partners, right? And so you're trying to move your legislation through. You need the majority of the votes if you're trying to move your bill, or your job could be to kill legislation that will hurt individuals and impact communities or business. It depends who you represent. Um, how successful and well received was your testimony and letters of support or opposition? Follow-up meetings. You also get feedback from some of the, you'll learn from the press, stakeholder roundtables, and even receptions. So there's some of the things you'll out and about, you'll hear how well you're doing. But sometimes legislation gets stalled and it's frustrating. But you also have to think about the actual impacts because we work in a world of limited resources, and that is a reality. So let's think about all the unfunded mandates and what are the impact of those? Who covers those bills? How do those occur? Um, and sometimes if we create more safety nets and catch-alls for the community and society, someone's paying for that, if that makes sense. So Regarding whether it's fulfilling or not, depends on where you stand, on who you represent, and the positions. Not all the positions you represent are going to usually align with you morally, but your individual position is not what is the center of focus. You represent, you are an arm of another industry or another individual or corporation. And you have to think about how are those limited resources utilized and what the impact will be down the road. And your legislation may pass or it might be tabled. And also being patient. I've had legislation, something I wrote 1 year, I was told we needed to wait 2 years on it. And we did. And it passed and it made sense on why we needed to wait. It's all about strategy. It is constantly playing chess, not checkers. This is not short-lived wins, and these aren't easily foreseeable issues. It's a long-term strategy that you need to craft, and it is a slow and steady pace sometimes to get to the end, the ultimate end goal. For instance, let me give you a good example of that. A lot of places in which they have cannabis is legal. That often started with medical cannabis. When medical cannabis was raised, there was an understanding that they were going to legalize it down the road, but it might take 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years later. But how do we get to, legal cannabis at the state level? You start small. You start with the medicinal purpose. If you the Charlotte's Web, people with seizures, that it was helping the children. People with severe chronic pain. I mean, there's so many medical uses, and it really did help a number of people. Understanding that the long-term goal might actually be something that that the legalization of cannabis down the road. Same with body cameras for police or some of the innocence projects that we worked on.
Oh. Again, MK Gamble. And if you're listening to this and you're asking a question or you're thinking to yourself, wow, I really could use some support in regards of public engagement, government relations. Obviously, look no further than the Science Policy Action Network, SPAN-INC.org. But MK, how does one determine whether or not they need to invest in government relations? How does one determine whether they need to kind of look in the way of lobbying? You might be a community organization, you might be a business, and you might could benefit from this type of engagement. How does one realize that this is a service that they might need?
Well, I will tell you this. If you are regulated by government or impacted by government and you need a change, lobbying is the way to go. You need someone in government relations, and it can be a multifaceted strategy, whether it's also um, sometimes you engage with media, it's sometimes direct contact with the legislature and the staff, all of that. Um, if you are impacted and you need to see a change, and the only way to receive that relief is through interaction with government, then you probably need a lobbyist. And if you don't have some, or if some companies have legislative affairs divisions, and even those, that's actually something we should touch on that we did not touch on. A number of nonprofit schools, even let's take a school district, let's take charter schools, for instance. They'll have a government affairs person and they'll have an in-house government legislative liaison, especially if it's a government entity, let's say charter schools or something like that, or the prosecutor's office. A lot of entities also have external government affairs individuals. So they still hire, so that it becomes part of a strategy, if that makes sense. So you have your private sector individual lobbyists, as well as those that are also internal and in-house to your organization. Maybe you need something, maybe you're not strong in the Senate, and you need those relationships. So you try to identify what weaknesses you have, how are you regulated, and what is the relief sought. And if if the relief comes through government engagement or through what would be government affairs or lobbying actions, then you probably need a lobbyist. And it can be for short-term issues. People will employ lobbyists for either one issue, 1 year, 2 years. Sometimes they do it for a session. It just depends on what those needs look like.
Hey, thank you for that. That was really key. That even if you as an organization have a position or a department that focuses on government affairs, government relations, that it still may be beneficial for you to look into government affairs support and lobbying services. And thank you so much for mentioning that. And again, span-inc.org. I think that's really, really key. And I think that's really, really important. I feel like I know I'm leaving out something, right? This happens to me every single time that I get on the horn with just amazing people, whether it's experts in law, experts in government relations, scientists, policymakers, thought leaders, or anything in between. And what happens without exception is that at the end of the call, or maybe days following the call, I begin to kick myself because I should have asked this, or I should have asked that, or I had this person on the Richard Watkins podcast with this opportunity to explore so many different topics, and I didn't. That I always ask, no matter who I talk to, this final question. And obviously, MK Gamble, thank you so much for being on the show. And we always want to be mindful of your time because I know you're here, there, and everywhere. But what question should I have asked you, right? And then if you wouldn't mind asking that question and then answering it, right? Because like I said, without exception, I leave something out that I should have addressed. But from your perspective, what question should I have asked you? And then, yeah, provide an answer to that question.
Okay. Um, Two come to mind. The first will be challenges and opportunities to lobbying, and the last one will be key takeaways. And I will start with kind of like the challenges. We talked a little bit about misconceptions. Some people assume it's corrupt. And that's just not necessarily, that's not, lobby's regulated. It is regulated. So, whether there's options there are bad actors in every industry. It is a regulated field that is reputable. It's really based on your reputation. So challenges it is very fast paced. You're balancing competing interests and priorities, building trust with officials while also staying ethical, which is not that hard to do. Dealing with rejection and setbacks when your bills don't pass. You asked, what is the measure of success? Sometimes your bill doesn't pass this session, but it could next session. So that's some of the challenges. Benefits, direct impact on laws and policies that can shape lives, building powerful networks across government, business, and your community. And that's key. If you have relationships in government, business, and community, it can make you a very formidable force, right? Great, a million opportunities for you and your organization. Uh, Benefits, diverse career path. You can do corporate. You can have it for nonprofits. There's agencies and independent consultants. Let's see. And key takeaways. Lobbying is advocacy. We cannot forget that. Every organization, I should say every organization, every industry lobbies. Whether it's the milk industry in the 80s, if milk does a body good, that's the milk lobby, right? Probably sold a lot of cereal, a lot of ice cream, a lot of milk that year. But lobbying as advocacy and representation really does matter for your community, your industry, and it's open to you. It's open to everyone. You just need access. You need to understand what you're doing. Think about this. Anybody can learn electrical work. Do you want to take the time to do it? When you do it wrong, you can have some devastating consequences. Whether it's electrical fires, electrocution, or whatever else. It's not going to kill you, but you want your professionals there. And the last thing I want people to take away from this, government affairs lobbying, it's really about trust. It's not tricks. It's your reputation on the line. And if you don't have a strong reputation, or a good reputation, it will impact the contracts you receive, the efficacy, and how well you're listened to. And that will trickle down to your clientele. And that will be a real measure of failure. If you are not hired, bills aren't moving, and everything that you do is kind of stopped. That's a measure of it's a good metric for feedback on how you are doing and how you're perceived in the industry. So your
And
reputation.
yeah, and you were also talking about some takeaways. What are some key takeaways for us?
So those are the ones that lobbying is advocacy, representation matters. Making sure, lobbying is about trust, not tricks. Those are the takeaways I want people to understand.
Yeah, I just want to say you're absolutely right. And unlike most guests I have on, I like I said, I have the privilege of working with you. Absolutely incredible, and um, being able to do this work is just absolutely fantastic. We've had an opportunity to work at the private sector, the nonprofit sector, at multiple levels of government and policy making. And you're right, it is. I cannot explain just how incredible it is because you get an opportunity to see so many different levels of society, work with so many amazing individuals. And when you do good work and you see people come back to you and you get that feedback, it is just absolutely incredible. And then knowing that the work that you do go towards, impacting industries, people's communities and lives. I mean, it is a tremendous feeling. One last question I do have, and I promise I'll let you go. And I thank you so much for your
I'm here.
time already. If anybody out there is listening and they're inspired by this call, right? Obviously, they know where to go to if they need support with government relations and government affairs, obviously. But if they're interested in getting involved with this type of work, if they're interested in becoming the next MK Gamble, what tips would you have for someone? Say, for instance, it's a college student, and they're interested in getting into this type of work. What should be some of the first steps that they should take, and what are some pieces of advice for them?
If you can't work in the state house where you are, then you need to go inside to a government entity first. It is your efficacy as being a private lobbyist starting there. I see people do it. It's different. If you haven't been under the dome, if you don't understand what is happens behind closed doors, I mean, a number like in any industry, right? There are things that happen closed door policy. Think about your biggest organization or last place you worked, right? And there are tons of things that are just aren't shared publicly. So you want to understand the culture, um, what's being said by not being said, if that makes sense as well. What's the expectations are, what's the culture. You need to gain that experience internally. And once you have worked internally, you'll be um more effective. And people look to what they know, if that makes sense. We have these close niche organizations. So think about if it's your local church, for instance. I'm just going to take a church. Um, how often are you hiring someone who's atheist, right? If you're not one of the team members, you're not an insider who knows insider baseball. It's often harder. So you want to go inside, get the knowledge, get the community, get the exposure and experience, and from there, it'll open up doors. You can go a number of different ways, but you'll also get an understanding by being inside. The stakeholders come to you. That includes the lobbyists. That includes the community groups. You sometimes don't even know who the stakeholders are on an issue until you're on a stakeholder meeting. And if we're all coming from different angles and don't converge, much like this painting behind me, everything comes to center, right? You want to be center, that hub and spoke approach. So if you can find a way to be internal in some government agency, especially under the dome, it will just give you a huge leg up. I think everybody that I know, I don't think I know anybody that's not worked under the dome before at some point working in either legislative liaison work or lobbyist work. It's a huge difference. There's some people whose parents, now if you come in from your mom and dad did it, then obviously if it's legacy, it's a little bit, it might be a little bit easier because you're building on their reputation. But you want to be a part. I almost hate to say it, but you almost have to start with government. It's the strongest way. It's not impossible to start outside of government, but starting under the dome or in government will give you a huge leg up and make it easier as you then build whatever that career path looks like for you outwardly into government affairs, public relations, lobbying, or sometimes you might just want to do policy work and think tank work. And that's a great opportunity too. There's so many career paths under this umbrella that you can take and get a great mentor and be willing to do the long, hard work. These are not 9 to 5 days. It varies per legislature, but I will tell you, They're not 9 to 5 days. I know in Illinois this year, I think we finished at 2:30 a.m. Last year, 2:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, 2:36 a.m. I think to be exact. Last year we finished Wednesday about 4:37 a.m. on a Wednesday. I mean, these are not 9 to 5s. So it's about relationships, networking, and you don't have to be an extrovert, but you do have to be present, engaged. I think it's a great starting.
Wow, those excellent, 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 excellent. MK Gamble, thank you so much for being with us today. She talked about the ins and outs of government affairs, government relations, and lobbying work, how you can get involved, how you can get prepared, the importance of lobbying to everyday life and government. Thank you so much, MK, for being with us today. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate you, and I'm glad to be a part of the Richard Watkins podcast.
This is awesome. Remember, folks at home, check out the Richard Watkins podcast. Whether or not you check us out on YouTube or Facebook, be sure to follow, like, subscribe, and share. Remember, it helps us out more than you even know. The Richard Watkins podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN. And remember that the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. Until next time, take care.